Hey y'all, Data Guy here. And today I got a really cool video for you on how you can do automated sentiment analysis off of any API endpoint. So what we're doing here in this example is just hitting an manatee joke API endpoint and then running this tool called HuggingFace, where I can call the HuggingFace API and have it run sentiment analysis on a JSON that I'm going to send to it. So what we're really going to be doing is taking this manatee joke API, calling it, getting a joke, passing it to this Hugging Face API, and then getting the sentiment analysis returned from it. So you can obviously replace the Manatee Joke API with a more relevant API for whatever your use case is. And the advantage of doing this during Airflow, using Airflow, is if you want to do something like, say, every day I want to run sentiment analysis on Wall Street bets to figure out, hey, what's the latest Wall Street bet thing that I want to ape in on. This can just every day pull from the Reddit API, run sentiment analysis, and just send you a score of, hey, what is the sentiment on these stocks? Or, if you're a company, on these customers, right? So super adaptable use case. And I'd really like this Hugging Face API just because I can just call it out, get sentiment analysis and coming right back. Obviously there's other options for sentiment analysis, but figure this one would be a cool one to show you. So to get started, we're going to do the classic import rundown. So you need the DAG decorator, the Astro SQL as AQL that just allows you to pass SQL data frame or SQL generate tables as data frames within Airflow without needing to really mess around with task inputs and outputs. Same thing, Astro SQL tables, so that we can just generate tables and then pass them into that Hugging Face API. Empty operator. Then pandas as pandas data frame, because as always, we love using pandas. Pendulum, logging requests in OS, just things that we'll need to do to actually hit that API and then log the requests. So now that we've gotten the basics out of the way, let's start building our tasks. And so before we actually start building our tasks, we're going to first set up a task logger. So this is just basically something we can call within a task to get all the logs and return them. So we're really just going to be using this for getting some of this API information from the logs, but you don't necessarily need to have it. Then after that, we're using Snowflake as kind of the intermediary database here, but you could sub this out with whatever database you want to use. It's not really dependent too much on that. Then you'll also need to get a Hugging Face API token. So this is just going to create a Hugging Face API environment. And then finally, the sentiment analysis model we're using, we're calling this Cardiff LP Twitter Roberta based sentiment, just a random sentiment analysis model that we found. But you can use your own NLP processor. This is just how we're going to be passing this to that API endpoint to use this specific model. So after we've gotten all our basics out of the way, we can start building our first task. So here we're using the AQL task decorator to just take whatever the output of this task is and pass it as a data frame downstream. So here we're getting a random joke from this API. So you can see us using requests to call from that API. Then we're creating a pandas JSON normalized JSON here, and then reading that into a data frame. So basically we're just datafying all of this API. So taking all the different strings that make up a joke and just creating a data frame from them. So you can see these are kind of the structure of how this is going to be. So we have the ID and joke ID, renaming it and then printing it. So this just allows us to check up on in the logs when we're actually running this task. And then we're going to return that so the next task downstream can ingest it. And the next thing we're doing is taking setup and punchline. So this is going to be a table of jokes. We are just going to take the setup and the punchline from within that table. So this is going to be the string that is a joke setup. And then this one is going to be a string that is a punchline. And then again, we're returning this as a data frame so we can pass it to the next task without needing to convert it ever. Now, finally, the exciting part, running the actual sentiment analysis. So within this task, which again, we're using the data frame decorator, we're passing in that pandas data frame we created, our Hugging Face API token as a string, and the model name we're using as a string. So those are the ones we set right up here. Then we're running a sentiment analysis. So here we're going to print the data frame again, just to make sure it's the same. Set our headers for the Hugging Face API token, so authorization. And then for our query, we are going to list all the setup values and all the punchline values. So all the different setup and punchlines within that data frame we created earlier, printing them out, again, check up on them. And then here we have the API URL. So here you can see we're using that basic Hugging Face API base endpoint. And then this Jinja templating is taking that model name, which is this NLP Roberta based sentiment model, and passing it in here. So then we're going to take our response request from that API, passing it our JSON, which is just our list of setup and punchline values, passing that into this API URL we created using Jinja templating. And then whatever this response is, we are going to take it and log it in a JSON file. So first we're going to check the status code to make sure that it actually gave us a valid response. Otherwise, we'll just give ourselves a return of whatever the error code was for this particular task. But if it runs successfully, what this will do is read that response and then drop it in the task logger of whatever that response text was. So giving us that sentiment analysis within our text file. So that's all of our tasks set up and written. So if you wanted to send this to an external location, here's where you would take that response text and like send it to an email, send it to Slack, however you want to disseminate that. You don't want to be logging into Airflow to look at log files to see that sentiment analysis score. As I imagine, most sane people do not. And so here on the DAG level, just standard DAG definition, manatee sentiment, just starting with an empty operator. So just have an empty operator start, we're not immediately picking the API. Then we're getting that, using that get sentences from the API, connecting to our manatee hook API, and then storing that within our Snowflake database. Then we're transforming. So that data that's in Snowflake, we are then taking just the setup and punchline. So it also comes with like a timestamp and I think a couple other things. We just want the setup and punchline because that's actually relevant, and creating a table called the joke table. So it's a little bit cleaned up for when running the sentiment analysis. And then finally, when we're running the model, we are passing it that transform data frame, passing it that API token, and the sentiment analysis model, which, as we just saw, uses that to actually make an API request to HuggingFace and return us the sentiment score. And so you can see here the bit mapping, start in data, transformed in data, and then we have an AQL cleanup if we actually want to clean up at the end. And then all we need to do is just add manatee sentiment at the bottom to declare it, and we're off to the races. So now let's switch over to the Airflow UI just to show you what the graph looks like for this. So in the Airflow UI, what this looks like is we have our start, getting those sentences from the API, transforming them, and then going into sentiment analysis. And then this cleanup is just run in tandem. So what this will do is just, after our task is done, clear all the data frames so they're not just taking up space in our XCOM database. So pretty simple DAG, but really powerful if you're trying to run sentiment analysis on some kind of location, a news article, Reddit, wherever, and get that to you on a regular basis so you can make more informed decisions. So I hope you learned something. I hope you see how extensible this is, and I hope you try it out for yourself. So Data Guy out. Peace.